Okay, so welcome everyone to this Oxford Water Network workshop on global challenges in water governance publishing. It's a publishing workshop and the book series presentation. With me today are Dr. Shilpi Srivastava. My name is Dr. Kevin Gregg, and with us as well is Rachel Ballard. I will introduce each and every one as we go along. So the plan for this early afternoon is to give you a very brief introduction into this book series. And then Rachel will take over and present the view or the point of view from the publisher's perspective, introduce the process, how to write a proposal, etc. But most of all, since this is a workshop, we want you to have the possibility to ask questions, and hopefully we can answer your questions as well. So let me give you kind of like a little story just to introduce the book series. So obviously this is about water, and the photograph you see, this is a picture I took last weekend in the southwest of Germany. And despite having lived there for quite a substantial number of years, I've never actually came across this because the whole region is most famous for its wine. So this is a little bit in the shadow, but it's actually part of the UNESCO Intangible World Heritage. So these are so-called like water meadows. So what happens now, you can store water and then water is released to flush the meadows with nutrients, which is beneficial for farming, but also for cattle and other animals on the fields. And I thought this is a nice kind of like introduction to the book series in the sense that it makes clear some important points about like water challenges or water governance challenges, because obviously it is a water governance issue because it's about controlling the flow of water, who gets water, at what point of time, where. It's about water rights and water justice. So obviously this dates back to the mid-18th century, and the water was controlled by whoever owned the land at this particular point in time or over the course of time. So it's about like water rights, water justice, something we see increasingly in water governance debates. I'm sure you're all aware of the discussions around rights for rivers, etc. And then it also makes another important issue clear, which is that water never comes alone. It's a cross-sectoral issue. So the moment we talk about water, we talk about agriculture, we talk about forestry, we talk about economics, and the list goes on and on and on. And this, I think, just leads me nicely into starting off with some of the key areas that we would like to, or that we are addressing with this book series. And first of all, as I mentioned, that we are interested in proposals and books that cover these cross-sectional issues and these cross-sectoral impacts. So as I said, it's never a standalone issue. It might be a very local water problem, it might be regional, it might be global. It might affect just one other area because it's about irrigation. It might be about a couple of issues that like irrigation, public water supply, water pollution, etc., etc. And then it's about innovations in the water sector and linking them with water governance, justice, and rights. These issues become more prominent, they become more important. We see climate litigation. I mentioned that rights for rivers. We see phenomena like remunicipalization, so where private water supply is put back into the hands of public, back into public hands. And then, of course, as the series is called Global Challenges in Water Governance, that means we are also looking for geographical diversity. And but it's not a must. It can be a comparative focus as well. So all continents, all regions, all localities are welcome. And with this, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Shilpi, who will talk to you a little more about some of the key areas that we cover in this book series.
Thanks, Kevin, and hello, everybody. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. I have just finished my fieldwork I am currently in India, and I've just finished fieldwork in Gujarat. And just related to the point that Kevin was making, so I'm just back from an area which is historically drought prone. So stories around water scarcity, water access, intergenerational access, gendered access, and issues like that. But increasingly, it's witnessing floods. So a lot of issues that we're talking about today and things that we're interested in, we're also placing it in the larger context of climate change and other global challenges as well, because these intersect with issues like food security, gender-based violence, rights, intergenerational rights, as well as issues around justice, and especially climate justice, which is becoming quite a key concern over the years within scholarship, as well as more largely in wider debates. So I just wanted to chip in with a few quick points here. When we took over as series editors, I think we had quite a bit of brainstorm about what are some of the things that we want to really focus on, what would be our target audience, and also the embedded values we would like to espouse through the series. Many of us have been through anxieties of publishing first time, or general publishing, and I know that the process can be quite daunting. All of us know that. So hopefully this event, and the reason for having this event, was also to simplify that process for you. And we are of course open to questions, and now when we have the Q&A, and also later, so please feel very welcome to reach out. The Pivot series is shorter than a regular monograph, and and Rachel is going to talk a lot more about this. The reason this series could be attractive, and in a way, what we argue can also be transdisciplinary in nature, is also because we are targeting both academic and practitioner audience. Given its focus of a non-monograph style of publication, I think it's great for those who are synthesizing their project findings. It can be, of course, PhDs and dissertations, and many of us are interested in converting our dissertations to a publication, a book, but also for those who are doing small projects or large grants, and you have a piece of work which you think you have the data for, you've synthesized it. So it can be quite a quick turnaround that way. So in this way, we think that it'll be quite attractive to both academic as well as practitioner audience, and therein lies its transdisciplinary orientation. As Kevin has already mentioned, given the fact that water is complex, it's terribly interconnected, it also speaks to the interdisciplinary nature of our series. So it's not predominantly social science. We are open to proposals from all quarters. And of course, we very much welcome more interdisciplinary engagement. So social sciences with natural sciences, as well as humanities, for instance, that will be very welcome as well. And we can talk a bit more about this in the Q&A. One key emphasis for the series is on geographical diversity, not only in terms of regions covered as case studies, but also about equity in scholarship. So we welcome contributions from early careers as much as from senior or mid-career colleagues. We're also particularly interested in encouraging contributions from the Global South, and not just on the Global South. So I wanted to make this distinction here. So it's just not about having diversity in the case studies and the material that is presented in the book series, cases you want to rely on, but also about encouraging scholarship coming from the Global South. And we do recognize that a lot of supporting and encouraging environment is required for that. And we are open to conversations around this. So pushing for both equity and diversity through this series. I will now hand over to Rachel, who will talk about the nuts and bolts of publishing process.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. As well as working with Kevin and Shilpi on the series, I'm also publisher for the Geography and Environment programme at Palgrave. So today I am going to give you an overview of the Geography programme at Palgrave. I'll take you through some of the publishing formats that we offer. Then we'll go through the steps to publication, which hopefully will be of interest to many of you here. I'm going to mention a little bit about open access, and then finally I'm just going to mention Nature Water, which is launching in January 2023. I'm not directly involved with that, but my colleagues at Nature asked me to mention it, so I've thrown that in there at the end for you. So to start with, the Geography Environment programme at Palgrave was launched in 2015. And the subject focus was always going to be on sort of human environment interactions, very diverse in its content and focusing on the social and natural physical sciences where that intersect happens, and looking at a very diverse formats to represent the diverse subject communities that we serve. And increasingly, you know, we've had to look at flexibility in terms of the content that we offer and looking at content that is more applied in approach. So the content that bridges the academic and practitioner divide, as well as the more kind of traditional academic focus that many book programmes have. We also have a number of book series, including the water governance series that we're talking about today. So in terms of publishing formats, we have quite a wide range of formats that we offer. We have the traditional research monographs and edited collections, and they really are the bread and butter of many publishers, including Palgrave. Then we have Palgrave Pivot, which I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail. We have handbooks, major reference works, and more recently, we've been publishing upper level textbooks as well. So in terms of Palgrave Pivot, what is it? So Pivot was developed really in response to the needs of the academic community. Increasingly, we have people approaching us, asking us if we had anything that sat between a traditional monograph and a journal article. And this makes complete sense to us because very often you might have content that you published in journals, but you've got more to say, but not enough to sort of dedicate to a research monograph. So Pivot was developed in response to that. So it's really publishing at a length between that journal article and conventional monograph. And it's an opportunity for your research to have more impact. They're short and accessible. They're between 25 and 50,000 words in extent. Publishing in print and digital formats, and open access is an option as well if funding is available. So why would you choose to publish Palgrave Pivot? Speed to publication is really one of the key sort of factors that attracts a lot of people. From when we accept a manuscript into production, it takes 12 weeks to publish. Pivot often offers a lot more flexibility. So it's the ideal format to publish more policy-oriented content as well, because if you're trying to reach that audience that sort of bridges that academic practitioner divide, very often people don't have time to read a monograph. And so Pivot is something that might be more suited to that. All our pivots, I mean, all our formats are peer reviewed, and all our formats will have wide dissemination through our ebook collections, published in hardback, digital collections, and open access as well, as I've mentioned. So I'm now going to take you through our steps to publication. And we've really drilled this down to 5 key steps. So the first is where you develop an idea. So you might approach a commissioning editor and just run an idea past them. Then you would draft a proposal outline, which we would then send for peer review. And providing that the peer review is positive and supportive, we would then offer you a contract. We would then work out a timeframe for you to prepare your manuscript, which is step 4. And step 5, we publish your book. So I'll just go into each of those steps in a little bit more detail. So first of all, developing an idea. What do we look for in a book? First and foremost, original research. Could be a new perspective. It could be a new interdisciplinary approach. It could be something that applies to policy, such as the Sustainable Development Goals. Does your topic have relevance for an ongoing debate? Do you have a clear, persuasive and coherent argument? And most importantly, are you connecting with a defined and realistic audience? And what book is needed for this audience? And I think something that's very important is, does your book fit with the strengths of the publisher that you're speaking to? It's a good idea to really research the publisher and look at other books that they've published in your field, Because sometimes people, if you're coming to us and saying, I've got a book, it's going to appeal to everyone, we want it priced at £10, it's going to be in every bookstore, we're probably not the publisher for you. So you need to think quite carefully about your market and the publisher that you're approaching. So the second step is where you'd submit a proposal. So we have a proposal form that we send to people, and it's quite straightforward, self-explanatory, but we've got some top tips that we would recommend you sort of take on board when you're thinking about developing a proposal. First of all, the title. Now, this is really, really important. You know, if you have a bad title, it can kill a book. So be very clear and descriptive in your title. It's really tempting to have a title that's a bit creative, but with academic books, you have to think about key search terms and key, the things that people will look for when they're searching for a book online. So it's tempting to have metaphors and dates in your title, but try to be as clear and descriptive as you can. In the description about the book, think about who exactly is going to read the book that you're proposing, and what are you offering that's different to that that's already on the market. And why would someone choose to read the book that you're writing? You know, sometimes in this section, the proposal form, people go into too much detail. So you really need to hone in on what are the key selling points for your book. And then content. We ask for a quite detailed table of contents, including chapter abstracts, which is quite useful for reviewers, so they can gauge how much depth you're planning to go into in each chapter. And the market. Often I suggest that people focus on the market first, because you really need to be realistic about your market. Who exactly are you pitching your book at, and at what level? And sometimes if you start there, that helps shape and frame the proposals you're developing it. And then finally, your competition. Again, be really realistic and have a look around to see what other books are on the market that match your subject area, and what are you offering that's different. You know, even if there are lots of books on the market that already have covered that's your topic in a lot of detail, if you're offering something different, that's great. You know, there's always room in the market for another book if you're offering something a bit different. So the next step is peer review. So we send all our proposal outlines for peer review. And we usually try to get 2 to 3 reader reports for each proposal. And we ask them a set of questions that we've listed here on the slide. So basically, we ask them, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the proposed book? Would you suggest anything else? Any different content? Would you suggest a reframing of the table of contents? Does it take existing scholarship forward? That kind of question. And then depending on the outcome of that peer review process and discussion in our internal editorial meetings, an offer of a contract might be made. So we've offered you a contract and we've worked out a time frame for delivery of the manuscript. So you would start drafting your manuscript. If you need to seek permissions for third-party material, we always advise that you do this at an early stage, because if you leave it to the last minute, it can delay things and it can take a while to get those permissions sorted. Then you would submit a draft of your manuscript. We would send that for one more round of clearance read. Then you would submit your final files to us. The manuscript is handed over to our production team, where it's copy edited and typeset, and then we would go through to publication. And our production team turns your manuscript into a book. And we publish in print, ebooks, and all our books go into our ebook subject collections. And my copy is something that's offered via the subject collections that you can access via the library. And that's where students generally could get a cheaper print and bound copy via their library for £24.99. So I'm just going to quickly mention open access, because it's something that we're encouraging our authors to think about if you have funding available. So obviously there are benefits to open access, which I'm sure all of you already know. But in terms of the books, we've seen that our books have 2.4 times more citations. They have 10 times more downloads, 10 times more online mentions. So, you know, it's really obvious to us that there's an increased visibility and readership of your research if you can publish open access. So it's definitely worth thinking about if you do have funding. And I've just got some illustrative examples here of some recently published open access pivots. So the Climate Smart Food Pivots published in 2019 and has already generated 131,000 downloads. And then the Advancing Energy Policy title in the middle has generated 58,000 downloads, and Addressing the Climate Crisis, 20,000 downloads. And generally for non-open access pivots, they generally sort of generate around 10,000 to 15,000 downloads in its lifetime. And so finally, I'm just going to mention Nature Water. So I can't talk too much about this, I don't know that much about it, but Nature Water is launching in January 2023. And it's going to cover all aspects of the evolving relationship between water resources and society. And they're really encouraging submissions from the social sciences as well as physical sciences and natural sciences. This is the scope of the journal at a glance, which I'm sure will evolve and change over time. As you can see, they've got a website that they've just launched, and they've got a Twitter account, which you might want to give a follow. And there's the email address there of the editor-in-chief if you want to get in touch directly. So that's fabiopolizzi@nature.com. So yeah, that's launching in January 2023. Thank you very much. Any questions? There's my details there, my email, if you think of any questions after this presentation. And then obviously we have a Twitter account as well, if you'd like to give us a follow. Thank you. I will hand it to you.
Yeah, so I open the floor for any questions or comments. Have any? Just put up the hand symbol or put it in the chat. Yeah, Saskia, go ahead, please.
Thanks. Thanks so much for the presentations. It's been really interesting and quite exciting hearing about this book series. I just have a quick question to start off. I'm wondering about the kind of acceptance rate. How many proposals do you typically get to a series like this, and how often are proposals successful, I guess, if you have some idea of that?
So most proposals that are submitted, we would have quite an in-depth discussion before we actually send it for peer review. So generally, most of the proposals that we would send for peer review, I would get a sense of whether they're, they will go through or not. And generally they are accepted. I think once you've got to that stage, I think we've worked with the authors to hone those proposals enough, so we know that it will be fine. We really try not to, I think if a proposal was really awful, I mean, we would have that conversation quite early on in the process. So I don't think we would get too far down the line before, that we would have to say, no, we can't do this. I mean, generally the reviews that we get back are really constructive in terms of book proposals. And even if reviewers are quite critical, it's usually very constructive criticism. And then we can go back to the authors and say, can you reshape it? Can you work? So we work together to kind of reframe it if we have to. And generally we would accept, but we try and publish 2 to 3 books a year in the series. Obviously we'd like to publish more, but we have to be realistic about the sort of number of proposals that come in and things like that. But yeah, I'd say that most of the time we don't reject that many when we've got to that proposal stage, reviewing stage.
That's great to hear. It's a very nice difference from journal articles.
Yeah,
where
it's very different, and I think the review process is not as brutal as the journal review process.
Yeah, I can second that from my own experience, having published in this book series. But I think that I mean, as we all know, the peer review process from like journal articles, I think this one was really nice because it helps you strengthen your, not just your book proposal, but also your book in the end. Because I think writing a book is a lonely process because you have to do it yourself at the end of the day. So getting some feedback is actually really nice, and it helped me a lot.
And can I just add to that, because we've recently accepted a proposal and the author is preparing the manuscript now. So there could be difference of opinion and you can defend your position as well as you do with journal articles, and that will be taken into consideration. So if the peer reviewer has suggested some changes or has asked you to hone in on particular areas, but you don't agree because you think your specifics are slightly different, so there is space for that negotiation as well.
And I think, it's why it's really worthwhile spending some time on the proposal and really getting it, putting in enough detail so the reviewers can get a really good sense of what you're proposing, because often you think it's really obvious, you know what you want, but you forget to put it in the proposal form, and you've got to remember that that's all the reviewers will see. So yeah, it's worth thinking about that as well.
Thank you for those great responses.
I have a question regarding, because I only know like the journals and also like all the funding and all the money involved.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering about this book series, how much, like how is the contract works and like the funding, like the situations in between. If you can explain me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so what do you mean in terms of the funding? Do you mean for open access, or do you mean for?
I mean, to publish this book,
Ah.
in terms of that, like there was a contract
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
So like, how does the funding work in that contracting?
So you don't need to pay anything at all. Yeah. That's the difference. You don't need to. I mean, it's only your time. I mean, only your time. But yeah. So it's a very different process. So you would actually, if it's a standard kind of, it's not open access, then we actually pay you. I mean, you're not going to get rich. It's not Harry, you won't be the next Harry Potter or anything like that. But there is a small remuneration that we offer to write the book, which will be paid on publication. So yeah, when we work out the contract, that's really focusing on the time frame that you need for delivery, your responsibilities as an author, our responsibilities as a publisher, and the copyright situation as well. But yeah, there's no funding needed from your side. Unless it's open access, which of course would come from another fund.
Any other questions? Or
I have another one, but I want to leave space for anyone else if there's anything. Okay, so my other question was about the stage that the research has to be at. So if I'm wondering if you would consider kind of a proposal on the basis of a project design where not all of the results are in yet, or is it usually that it's a piece of completed research and then the proposal is more about how to frame it and write it up?
I guess it depends at what stage, have you got enough to say in the book? I mean, do you need to have, does the research need to be concluded, if you see what I mean, to write the book? I guess some people have written books before a research project is finished. But I guess if how you're writing the book needs to include those conclusions, then yeah, I guess it depends on where you are and how you're framing the book, and if you're sort of having broader conversations or debates within the book, then
yeah, I mean, I would envision that the research would be complete by the time the manuscript is finished, but I'm just thinking at the proposal stage and when you're kind of outlining what the manuscript would entail at that point, maybe. I'm just thinking about the timeline and
yeah. Sorry, yeah, no, and that would be fine actually, because I think if you can put in the proposal form, you can give quite a cohesive overview of what you're proposing, because there could be 18 months between when you've submitted your proposal form and when it publishes, or 2 years. So yeah, I mean, as long as it sort of makes sense in the proposal form, then yeah, I think that would be fine. I don't know if you've got any.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that? I mean, my sense would be, having published from research projects now, I think that you would, I mean, this is a personal opinion, that you should be at a stage where you have some sense of what your conclusions could be. So it shouldn't be from a stage where you're writing your research proposal. So some people, if you've been working in that area for a fairly long time and then you have a new project coming up, so you're building on a lot of material already, and that particular project is like an update on your scholarship or on the body of work that you want to build on. So there are different ways in which you could, it depends on where you locate the research project. But I think at the proposal stage, because there are certain questions that you need to answer in the proposal, how is it speaking to broader scholarship? How is it competing with other ideas and books in the area? I think you'll have some sense of the findings or what you're getting at, and not just some abstract ideas if they're not really supported by some empirical findings. But that's my guess.
Right, yeah, that makes sense, I guess, to know if you're going to be finding anything new. Thank you.
And then maybe if I may just like two observations I'd like to mention. So one thing is that during the whole process, there's always someone you can contact and you will get a response. So either during the proposal stage, that initial peer review stage, but then also the moment when your draft goes then into production. There's always someone you can contact. Maybe they set you a deadline for the proofs, and for some reason you can't make it because, I don't know, something has come up at work. You just send them an email, you ask, and you get a response. I mean, I usually get a response within 24 hours. That was always like super quick, I have to say. And the second thing is that, I mean, books contain a lot of words. But they usually also contain like tables, illustrations, maybe photographs, maps, etc. Don't underestimate this. I mean, this is something I tell students as well for dissertations. No? This takes time, first of all, but you need to be aware of like copyright issues and all these things. Again, there's help for this, there's support for this, but take this into account if you plan to integrate like lots of maps or into or photographs, illustrations, etc. Do you have permission? Is it your own creation? No, you can't just put like a Google map or so into the book. No, that's no. So these kind of like things. Yeah. No? So just be aware of these, and that this takes time as well.
I was also going to say as well, if you're an early career researcher and you're thinking about how to develop your thesis, you know, I think as Shilpi said already, we do welcome approaches from early career researchers. I think it takes quite a bit of work to develop your thesis. It's not just a case of taking your thesis and then just reframing it into a book, you know, with a hardback cover and whatever. But we do have hints and tips, and we've got an early career researcher hub that we can point people in the direction of to help you think about what you need to do to develop your thesis. So I thought I'd just mention that as well. No.
Any more questions or comments?
I mean, if you do think of anything after this session, then obviously my email is there, and Kevin and Shilpi obviously available to answer questions.
I have another question. So in terms of the open access and also like the line the restricted access, how do you differentiate? Is it like the authors, for example, authors want to be open access? So is it directly like that consensus that came from, to be an open access, or how does it work between like the choosing the, you know, like the access point?
Yeah, so it depends on the authors, and sometimes the research that they are publishing, the funders actually specify that they want it to be open access, and they are providing the funding to make it open access. Sometimes your university might have a pot of money for open access. Generally that seems to be for journals, but it's worth asking because sometimes it does apply to books as well. For Pivot, for example, it costs £6,000 to publish open access. And if it's non-open access, we can contract it as non-open access to start with, and then if you get funding further along the process, we can flip the contract to an open access contract. So if it's open access, it will publish and be freely available to everyone on publication. And we publish under a CC BY license, which is the least restrictive license there is. Okay.
I just have a question about authorship, if I'm allowed to ask another question.
It's fine.
So my understanding is that it's more typical to have maybe one or two authors for a book, but since you are interested for the series, particularly in interdisciplinary, possibly transdisciplinary work, where there's often a lot of collaboration, how do you kind of, or how have people, I guess, in the past dealt with that, with authorship versus acknowledgements of other people who've been involved? And maybe if you could just give me a bit of a sense of how that works.
Yeah, I think for a lot of interdisciplinary subjects, people have tended to publish more edited volumes. So you will bring in different people from different backgrounds for different chapters. And, you know, edited volumes can be great. I mean, they can be awful, but they can be great if you have a really good, strong editorship, where the editors are really carefully bringing together the chapter authors and bringing an introductory and concluding, and, you know, really tying it all together and making sure there's a consistent theme throughout the book. And you can have pivots as edited volumes. It's a little bit more rare, but it does happen. So generally, I think if it's very interdisciplinary and you've got lots of people involved, it would tend to be an edited volume. Or you can have you can have more than two authors if you want to. I think there's probably a limit to what is practical. You know, just writing a book with kind of 10 authors would be quite tricky, I think, to manage. And then you probably would want to just do it as an edited volume. So there are pros and cons to both, I think. I guess an edited volume is quite similar to a special issue. So it's a bit like herding cats. So, you know, you've got people that will drop out at the last minute, or, you know, they won't deliver when they say they're going to. So, you know, it's things to take into consideration. But I would say generally edited volumes tend to work quite well if you've got a very interdisciplinary subject area.
Yeah, maybe just to emphasize again that if you have an idea, if you're unsure whether it fits into the series or not, just don't be shy. No? Just send an email to either Rachel or to Shilpi or to me or to all of us, or to all three of us, and we can give you some feedback and support you as well.
I think the great thing about publishing in a series is that you not only have the series editors to sort of provide advice and guidance, but you've got the publisher as well, you know, as commissioners like me. So you've got, in this instance, you've got three of us to kind of bounce ideas back. So, you know, that's quite nice to have, I think.
No more questions? Come on, Saskia, you've got another one. No. Yeah. Well, then I would like to thank everyone for attending this session. I mean, as I said, just to stress this once more, get in touch with us if you're interested in publishing within this series, or with Palgrave in general, I guess.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, always happy
to. Yeah, don't be shy. It's a great experience writing a book, even if maybe it's a nice start, even the Pivot series, to get into book publishing, because it's not quite as daunting as writing like 100,000 words. And it's, I mean, just speaking very personally, it's if you accumulate a lot of data and you've done a lot of like field work, for example, over the course of like 2, 3, 4 years, it's a nice way of not just wrapping it up, but packaging it into a very nice format. And you can provide like a more, even I guess like a more coherent and thorough kind of like picture of your research in this format than you would ever be able to do in a journal article, which is limited, as we all know. Okay. Yeah, so the session has been recorded, so it will be available, I think, on the Oxford Water Network YouTube site, no? And yeah, you have our contact data. And then I thank you again for attending and wish you a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
you.
very much.
Thank you.
Mhm.